Hi Ninjas, Paul here, and welcome to the latest in our series on selecting and buying HR software for your organisation. I'm here with Steve Elcock, who is the CEO and founder of our People Tech Partner Elements Suite. Hi Steve.
Hello Paul, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. And today we are at number 7 in our process, which is titled negotiating, but it's really about the period between the selecting your preferred partner and going to a full legal and commercial negotiation with your partner. So we think it's really important that you kind of set the parameters at this stage before you go to preferred partner, in order that when you get into that legal negotiation, everyone's really clear on what the expectations are and what's been agreed. Is that fair, Steve?
That sounds perfect.
Happy with that summary?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So it should be a relatively short session, but I think there's some really important hints and tips here for anybody that's going through this process, whether you've been through it before and it's been painful, or whether you're going through it for the first time. I've done it on both sides, so working for a software vendor, but also implementing software within an organisation as well. So know how important it is. So hope you all find it useful. Steve, over to you.
Right. No, thank you, Paul. So great to have that context and really appreciate the introduction. My name's Steve Elcock. I'm the CEO and founder of Element Suite. And as Paul mentioned, we've been going through a series with the Ninjas about the whole process of selecting, an HR system, working with a preferred vendor. And what I'm going to do is take you through today some of the slides that we've prepared, some thinking and guidance, I guess, around this tricky area of negotiation. It gets to a point where in that process, you've done all of your work to think about the products you need, to think about your internal, your data, your people, your requirements for a new system. But actually, you've got to that point where you're looking to actually select your vendor and you're wanting to negotiate with that vendor before you move to commercial. So that's the purpose of today's session. And if I may, I'm just going to try and beam up some slides and we're going to work through a little bit of that content. We can see the slides now. And this is just a framing slide. This is actually the number 7 in the series of how, for the HR Ninjas, how to select an HR system. And we've been through all sorts of things so far: the business case, how to do your internal research, how to go through a beauty parade with your vendors that you're looking to choose from, how to kind of frame your organizational structure, look at the data that's going to be required to actually set up the HR system and make the thing a success. You've hopefully taken a few of the suppliers through a decent kind of process to work out whether they're any good, whether you like them, whether they're going to fit your needs of your business case, and you've got your data ready. So now we're on to this very exciting business about actually negotiating with the vendor and saying, we think you're the one we want to work with. Prove to us that you can do the job. And that's really the focus of today's session. How do we go about that? There isn't really a kind of a rule book here. It's probably the first thing to say. Lots of people have lots of thoughts on negotiation. There's books, there's films, there's courses you can go on. All of that stuff about how to behave and being hard or soft, all those things. I'm not really going to touch so much on that today, about the behavioural aspect of negotiation, which is in itself a massive, probably multi-million-dollar sort of industry of how to negotiate with people. This is more about the practical things that we think you can do, the Ninjas can do when they get to that stage in their process, and the things that are really going to help them make the right decision and be clear and be confident about moving through the decision to work with the vendor.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Steve. I think from my point of view, the kind of number one rule with negotiation is don't leave it till the end. It's too late. If you're waiting till you're shaking hands and then you're negotiating, you've left it way too late. The earlier you can start to tease out these areas where there's not necessarily conflict, but where something needs to be agreed, the earlier you can tease those out, the smoother your process will be. So whilst it might be strange to be talking about negotiation even before we've got a contract, it's absolutely critical, I think, that you start to talk about these things at this relatively early stage in the process.
I couldn't agree more. And so many times I've been through processes where a customer has engaged a lawyer almost too early, where they haven't really been clear about what they want, and then the lawyers go mental and they come up with all these provisions that aren't really very helpful, and they're deliberately causing conflict. So you're absolutely right. The more that you can work with your vendor to really align on the key things as early as possible in the process, the better the outcomes are going to be. So yeah, just to summarize some of that, you've got slightly amusing sort of pictures up there, arm wrestles and handshakes, but there's always going to be a tension with working with the vendor, and you want to make sure that there's a healthy tension. You want them on the hook to do a great job. They want to hopefully do a great job for you, and it is an important thing getting this right. Several things we're going to cover today. One of them is that's a business of when do you tell the vendor they're actually selected. You don't want to tell them perhaps too early or too late. You don't want to drag the thing out. If you're really clear about your decision, it's great to kind of crack on, but going too early with that, you might not be ready internally. And I've seen several scenarios where people don't have their project team ready or even their budget approved. It's very embarrassing to tell a vendor, right, you've been chosen, and then to be told internally, sorry, there's no money to actually pay for this project after all. So a few things about a checklist of what you can do to make sure you don't get caught in that situation. Some stuff about kind of matching behaviours. We're moving very much towards partnership now as you're working with your vendor, and understanding their approach. It's not just the software, but it's also them as an organisation and the people you'll be working with, and also their method or sometimes called their methodology for delivery is really important to understand. And then towards the end, we're going to start to touch on that sort of really daunting area of contracts and legal. And in the next session, we'll get into much more detail about the technicalities of how this translates into a contract. But contracts are a pretty thorny area. I'm sure Paul, you've read a few in your time. It's this session will kind of ease us into that subject, hopefully for next time, and then some do's and don'ts at the end. So
That's a good point. I think from a buyer's point of view, getting towards preferred supplier is important, because I tell you what, it's just exhausting having multiple vendors on the hook, all of them demanding, asking questions. So actually, if you can get to the point where you've got a trusted partner that you want to work with, okay, there's still detail to be sorted out down the line. But if we can agree those high level terms and get in that sort of trusted partnership, win-win relationship, then the whole thing becomes a lot less time consuming in terms of trying to manage multiple vendors.
Yeah, 100%. And as you say, having too many sort of vendors on the hook, you get to a point where you're probably feeling that this is the one we're going to go for. You kind of don't know, should we tell them, should we not tell them yet? Do we have all of our internal approvals? Do we have everything tied away? And I suppose this first point here is when that timing point. Timing is everything, really, about how and when you tell your vendor that they're chosen. You'll have been assessing them. You'll have a feel for the right one. They may have disappointed you and they've come back, or they've always been the leader of the pack throughout the whole process. You definitely want to keep a sort of competitive tension going, but equally you don't want to string them along pointlessly when you need to crack on. They're probably anxious. Also they'll have salespeople who will be wanting to put you under some pressure to close. They have all their weird and wonderful reasons for perhaps their quarterly targets and their discounts they'll offer you if you can get a quick. You mustn't let that affect your timing. It's really important you don't get sort of bullied into a decision you're not ready for. Equally, if you are ready, let's crack on. So it's balancing that risk, really. Going too fast or too slow, both of them have risks. If you go too fast, you may not have your approvals and be ready. If you go too slow, you don't want to sort of annoy the vendor, or they've suddenly gone off on a different slant, or different customers have taken the delivery slots that were due for you. You may also have a burning platform problem. We often have this where things are due for renewal, and you're looking to time the introduction of a new system with the exit of an old one. So it's important that you get your timing right for those renewals. And it's also important, you may have heard of the term paralysis by analysis. You can analyze to death everything. And sometimes it just gets to the point, you know what, let's just go for it. We think this is the right thing to do. Once you're happy that you've done all your due diligence and enough things are in place, then it's a good idea to crack on and let the vendor know that they are selected, subject to whatever those things, subject to contract, subject to references, subject to things that you still have, keep them under a little bit of tension before you actually, as and when you announce that they're selected as well. I think there's just one last thing on that, which is around timing. We've had situations, I've been involved in some myself, where the timing has just dragged on and on and on. And, you don't know where you are. You don't know if internally, you don't know whether you're going to be able to proceed. The vendor has no clue about what's going on. And I think it's important to note that if you have that situation, you're likely to lose trust with the vendor if you can't give them clarity about timing. And even if you are stuck internally, it's the best idea always to be really open and transparent so that the vendor knows why there's a delay. And therefore, hopefully if the thing gets resolved, they come back and they're all guns blazing, rather than, giving you delays about their own enablement or their own ability to start the project as well.
Yep.
So how do you know? So we'd like to announce the selection, and I feel like it's the right time and we've done enough analysis. Let's just double check we've done all the right things, and all the right due diligence points have been undertaken. That's a little bit of a summary in this slide that hopefully 4Ninjas can provide a bit of a checklist. All the obvious things really to check off. And some of this, isn't rocket science. Projects are often, they talk about this sort of triangle of cost, time, and scope or quality. And really that's fundamental to how you're proceeding with your vendor. Are they in the cost range that you expect them to be, and is in your business case? Do you have all your approvals ready? Have you actually got your budget signed off by your board or your exec team? Does your vendor have any sort of nasty things they haven't shared with you? Have they got any hidden costs up their sleeve? Are there any integrations? There's often hidden cost in integrating with other systems. The vendor won't be that open with you probably about those, because they're expecting you to deal with those and understand your own touch points with the system. So be really careful to pick out integration costs, because they can often be hidden. The vendor themselves may have costs as well, like say postcode lookup services or bank sort code validation, little bits of extra cost that might not have been fully exposed in their pitch. So it's a good idea just to ask them again and again, are there any hidden costs they're aware of, making sure you're completely clear and transparent about cost from them, and that you yourself have your own internal approvals in place for all the cost assumptions there may be for the project. Secondly, I think there's the project team. Do you have your project team truly lined up? I've been on many projects where there haven't been sufficient resources assigned to the project internally, and that's made the vendor sort of charge extra money for extra project management or other resources they thought that you were doing as a customer internally. So be really clear about your project team that you're stumping up from your side, and also the expectation on them and the impact on their day jobs. Often we try and run projects whilst continuing with operational day job stuff that needs to be done. It's really difficult to do that, and we'd very strongly recommend that you have dedicated resources internally assigned to these projects to make them a success. If you don't have that, be aware that the vendor may pick at that and say that we need you to stump up extra money to pay for the shortfall in that, or ask you to find those resources, otherwise there'll be delays. Have you taken up references with the vendor? Very simple thing, but a great way of just checking that they are what they say they are. They've got the right kind of background and respect in the industry. And then there's a scope. Scope has been very much dealt with in the early sessions where we've looked at the RFI and the RFP and all those checklists. But it's really worth just asking the vendor to be transparent, to give you their feature set, or even maybe include their RFP in their commercial. Would they be prepared to include it in their commercial response to you in the next stage? That way you can really tie them back to what's been promised. Make sure the salespeople haven't just promised things that can't be delivered. That's a key point. And then timelines. Timelines we're going to go into shortly after this stage of the process, into legal process, and actually getting hold of lawyers, making them work to your timelines will be very difficult. They're hard to get hold of, they're very expensive, and just make sure you've given yourself enough time to close out the negotiation and the commercial points as you move forward with the next stage. And have you actually had sight of their terms and conditions? It's a very important point, because there could well be things that are heavily loaded in their favour that you need early sight of, so that you can challenge them and try and align, making sure that you're both clear before you go to the lawyers. When you go to the lawyers, they will naturally cause some conflicts, which are necessary for looking at the boundary conditions. But make sure you've seen early sight of the terms and conditions, so that you can red flag anything that you're not happy with. And I think as a final point, do you get on with them? Are they reasonable? Are they nice people to work with? Do they align culturally with you as a business? Very, very important that you choose a vendor that you know you can work with. This is a long-term partnership, and it's just important that you get on, because there's going to be tough points in that relationship, and it's far easier to work through those if there's reasonableness on both sides, rather than people you don't get on with.
Yeah, agreed. Just something going around in my head, Steve, around clearly there will be ninjas watching this that are working for large organizations that are replacing an old piece of software with something new, and to some extent it will be if not bespoke, certainly highly highly tweaked to their particular processes. But equally, there may be some ninjas that are buying their first system, perhaps a small business replacing spreadsheets and files in-house, where perhaps they're just going to buy something, probably software as a service over the internet, that they're going to use it straight out of the box. Yeah. I guess my question is, are some of these things less of an issue if you're kind of buying that plug and play type software, as opposed to something that's going to be highly configured?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's always this question of what's the size of the thing you're trying to achieve, and therefore how much effort and diligence you need to put in to achieve it. You're absolutely right that the effort and all this kind of the sort of low level ticking of all this stuff off is probably less important if you're just going for something that's very niche, very much smaller in scope. And if you have, for instance, if you have nothing today, if you're doing things paper based, moving to a system is going to take you a long way. I think a number of these things are still important, that regardless of the size of the project or the size of you or the vendor as an organization, always there's certain principles that need to be looked at, like the cost of it. Whether that's £100 or £100,000, it's still cost. Someone's got to pay for it. Like the scope of what you're trying to achieve, always really important just to write down, what are we trying to achieve, why are we trying to achieve it, what are the benefits, and also the timelines. When is it realistic to actually get this thing done? For something smaller, you like to think, okay, we can deliver this in, weeks and months, rather than a, massive, big enterprise deal on a McDonald's type organization, that's likely to take over a year. So you're right that gauging the kind of effort with the size of what you're trying to achieve, and also the size of the organizations, whether that's you or your vendor, that's probably, there's a proportional kind of size and effort aspect of this. It's a really good point.
Sure.
So just moving through the remaining points. So we're talking about moving towards a partnership. We've got slightly comedy image here of the Godfather and someone kissing his hand. So to this point, maybe, you've had all your vendors slightly on the hook, and they'll be very keen to impress, and they will also be behaving in a way that's quite deferent and quite accommodating to what you want, because obviously they want your business, but now we're moving to the seriousness of a relationship, and it's an often used kind of analogy, but it is probably one of the best analogies out there, the idea of marriage. This is about a marriage. It's in a relationship, you have points of contention and even negotiation perhaps with your spouse prior to being married, and actually making that decision to be married is a key thing. And in HR software terms, we're moving that relationship and the basis of it towards a partnership and away from that sort of slightly authoritative, customer versus vendor. We need this, you must provide. It's actually more about understanding the capabilities of the vendor so that you match, rather than just assuming all the time that the vendor will jump when you say how high, or the other way around. So it's interesting. We've all had experiences of like tough negotiators and people who beat their sticks and beat their chests. Really, in my experience, that's not the best way of getting the best outcomes when you get to this stage. I mean, it might be early on, it might be a good way of whittling out some of the early stage stuff, but when you get to that real kind of, we're going to go forward with this vendor, it's a really good idea to be open, to be transparent, to be really honest with them about your own strengths and weaknesses and organization. And in so doing, you will expect that behavior to be mirrored. You'll expect them to effectively reflect how you are with them. So that concept of understanding the partnership aspect of working with a vendor, really, really important as you negotiate. Don't expect the vendor to always just kind of roll over to every request. And equally, where there are maybe small things that need ironing out, just work through the process, understand why you're trying to achieve things. A good example is things like insurances, where sometimes people can be quite unrealistic about the level of insurance that people need and under which circumstances with their vendor. But actually, when you work through why is that insurance required, and is it just that actually if we had some good processes around checking things and checking data, and every week having a project check-in, every month having a governance check-in, you're likely to not roll into those problems that you think insurances will protect you from. And actually, those process changes are better than having an insurance. So it's just little things like that can really help as you're working through your negotiation process with the vendor. And one last point, I've said it already, but I'll say it again, is that when you tell them they're selected, never just make that the final statement. Say it's always subject to, because we're not there yet. We're not through the contract. Lots of things, it's not over till the fat lady sings, as they say, or at least the fat lady needs to sign the contract. And there's plenty of pitfalls still to come. So you should always say they're selected subject to the contract and other things that you might wish them to show you, their references, perhaps other things, another demo that you're unclear about, or the people or the CVs of the people you're going to be working with. So if you make that selection subject to, you give yourselves a little bit of protection as you go into the next stage.
Yep.
So a key thing we wanted just to pick up on before we come into land with this session is often the vendor will come to you with a really shiny, fantastic looking software package, and you're wowed by it and you say, yes, that's what I want. I want that thing. Salespeople have done a great job. You're saying, yeah, go. This is all fantastic. I want this software. But they haven't actually told you some of the fine detail about how they're going to deliver it and how they're expecting to be paid for it. So this is where we're starting to transition into the legal framework of how a contract should be constructed. So key questions you should be asking your vendor right now in this negotiation is, how are they being paid? Are you expecting, Mr. Vendor, to be paid from the contract signature date for this software, or is it at go live, or is it some mix of the two? So we start with a partial covering of the software costs, and then when we go live, you pay the full amount. These are all things that are really important to have clear before you go into the contract with your vendor, so that you're both broadly aligned and you don't end up with this great sort of bun fight when you get the lawyers involved, which they will have much fun in separating you even further. So do try and get aligned with how the payment structures are working. And that's not just for the software, it's also for the professional services. It's far more likely that you will stage your professional services payments according to delivery. So, are they on fixed price is the first point, or time materials? The time and materials is where you pay people on a day rate, but the vendor hasn't said, okay, it's boundaried or necessarily even capped at a certain amount. Fixed price is where things are absolutely capped, and the vendor has to kind of adhere to that fixed price they're delivering for. Are you going to the vendor may ask, cheekily, in my opinion, to be paid all of their professional services up front. That might be something you're prepared to do. There might be reasons why you're prepared to do that. You might have CapEx you need to get rid of, or capital expenditure or budget this year that you need to get rid of, and you're happy to do that upfront payment. But much more usual to have this based on milestones, where the vendor has to prove that they're delivering quality in the design analysis, the design, the build, the testing, and then the go live, and possibly even a milestone, several months after go live, so that you've got, coverage and a little bit of keeping the vendor on the hook and under the right level of tension to give you good support when you first go live. Do they have a way of showing you that they're on track with the project? Or is it just going to be, how's it going? Oh, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, that's not good enough. You need to have a constant way of checking in with them, checking that progress is being made, and checking you're happy with the timescales of what's being delivered, because you've probably made commitments to your exec and your board. Very embarrassing if you have to go back and change those. Are they delivering it themselves? That is a really key question. And that's, to Paul's point earlier, if you have a small vendor, it's likely that they will be delivering themselves. For the very big Oracles and Workdays and SuccessFactors, the big tier one, they're most likely, almost entirely, will be delivering this through third parties or through what's sometimes called systems implementers or SIs. So if they are using a third party to deliver the software, be very, very wary of this. This is one of a real trap people can fall into, because you've been sold the software by, a software company, and then the delivery people haven't been really as involved as they should be during that process. So be very careful about that, and make sure you've got the right level of scrutiny on that delivery partner as well. You need to start thinking about, if there is a delay, what's going to happen? How will we deal with delays? If the vendor is on fixed price, to a certain extent, it's their problem. However, if the delay is caused by you, be prepared for things in the contracts that say, we'll be on fixed price, but if you've caused a delay, then we reserve the right to charge more. And you need to just explore with your vendor during this negotiation process some of these difficult questions. And don't be afraid about them feeling or sounding difficult. The vendor will be very used to them. So be really natural and open and ask them these difficult questions, because better to ask them now than before engaging the lawyers in the process. And things like termination. Are you allowed to terminate the contract at any point for convenience? Typically, vendors will ask you not to include those type of clauses. They will have commitments themselves to annual contracts for their hosting and things like that. So they'll probably have minimum periods of time for you to sign up to a software as a service. And you need to be aware of that and discuss with the vendor if that's a problem. And if there is, again, if there's a delay, is there any compensation for late delay that's perhaps caused by the vendor? Sometimes people talk about long stop dates, and that's something, again, we can come on to in the contractual discussion, which will be the next session. And we're coming into land now, really. Just to touch really on the final point before we summarize, is the negotiation process is all about making sure you can work with the vendor, ironing out all the wrinkles, all the things that could, and sometimes will go wrong naturally. But really understanding the vendor's position before you move into that contract and that thing where you're both legally and commercially really on the hook for things. If you're aligned, you will save so much time, and you'll also save so much money. External lawyers, I'm sure you're aware, it's obvious, they're very expensive, difficult to get hold of, very expensive, and also it will take time to work through. So the more preparation you can do to make sure you're aligned on all of these key points: costs, timelines, scope, approach, people, hidden costs around interfaces and data migration, that will help you when you're looking at some of the more technical provisions within the contract. And hopefully you've seen that contract now from the vendor, and you can point out with them before you involve the lawyers things that perhaps you're not happy with, or things that you have question marks about. Sometimes people ask me, should we use the contract template from the vendor themselves or our own template? And I think that very much depends on the maturity of you as an organization. If you're used to buying SaaS software, then it's probably fine to use your template. It's far more usual to use the template provided by the vendor, mainly because they do this day in, day out. They'll have all of the correct provisions in place already. They might not always be in the first draft what you want, but that it will all be covered. There's a danger, I think, if you have this yourself and you're not experienced in procuring software, then you're going to miss some very important and key things like intellectual property provisions, like insurances, like things around data protection, which are increasingly important with GDPR, which no doubt you're all very familiar with. And that's something, when we get into contract, it is a key part of making sure the contract is robust. So the final piece, and then just hand back to Paul, is this. Just wanted to give a few practical pieces of guidance for ninjas just going forward. Key do's and don'ts. So give as much clarity as you can about the timescales. If you're clear with the vendor about the timescales, you have much more of a right to challenge them about being on time when in the delivery. If you can't hold your own timescales during a selection process, then you perhaps shouldn't expect quite so much that the vendor will hold their timescales back to you. It's very much about behaving to them like you want to be behaved to later on in the process. Make sure you've got that financial authority to proceed. Don't go forward if you're not 100% clear about your financial authority to proceed internally. Again, the vendor will get very naffed off with you if you suddenly cancel things. They'll have spent a lot of time and effort and money and maybe even legal fees, preparing for a project. They will want to get going, and that won't be good for your reputation or theirs. Make sure you've estimated your impact on your internal resources. This is a huge thing. I think we've jokingly said here, then double it, because we often see projects as hugely under-resourced on the customer side. It does take a lot of effort and energy, and it will be more than you think. So whatever you estimate, probably estimate it in addition, in excess of that, so that you're fully covered. Being respectful and reasonable is an obvious thing. That comes back to behaviours. Things will get mirrored, so be respectful and you'll be respected back. Be aware of the size and experience of the vendor, of what you're trying to achieve, their own company size, your size, and be reasonable about them carrying financial risk. If you have an Oracle or a Workday, they're probably far more able to carry financial risk than a small niche supplier. Whether they will, that's a different question. But you should just judge in your own mind what you think is a reasonable level of financial risk, depending on the size of the company you're dealing with. There's hidden costs. Tease them out, pick them out, ask questions. Don't let ambiguity exist. Any ambiguity will work probably against you if you're not careful. So do ask questions that you're not sure about interfaces, about data migration, about third parties that you might be working with. And this is a sort of an interesting little one. If there's something you get completely stuck on, a really useful way of defusing, a nasty thing that can't be sort of seem to be resolved, is to suggest to the vendor that you would do with them a press release or a promotional video that has an awful lot of value actually to the vendor, more than you'd probably expect. And if you can't quite get to a price, quite often the vendor will discount you in return for a promotional video, something to help them for their referencing and the other customers that they need. It's a really important point, and you can probably achieve quite a nice discount if you offer this back to the vendor and genuinely see it through. And then just on the don'ts, for goodness sake, don't get the lawyers involved too soon. If you do, it's very likely that you could have a huge 3-4 month process of going through a contract. If you're really aligned, this can be done in as little as 2 weeks. Typically we see a sort of 4-week window is normally the time it takes to go through both sides, and that's largely because lawyers are difficult people to get hold of. They're busy people, and they will naturally just test the boundaries of some of the things in the contract that will be difficult to respond to. So give yourself enough time, but don't involve them too soon. Select the vendor. Be really clear with them. Be clear about about their costs. What are they presenting to you in terms of their costs? Make sure you're crystal clear on the cost, and make sure you're clear with them on the scope of what you're trying to do. Don't let salespeople bully you into doing something you're not ready to do. They will moan and squeal about their quarterly targets, but don't let them do that. You've got to do it when you're ready. And be clear on the timelines and the delivery approach, the vendor you're using and the third party they might be using to implement the project with you. And finally, don't announce selection unless it's subject to the contract being completed, the references, and anything else you might want to throw in. And then I guess the final point goes back to the marriage point. You're about to get married with your vendor, so make sure you like them, make sure they're all the things you want them to be, and use this time of negotiation to kind of truly align on your costs, your scope, your timelines, and the things we've covered in this session. So hopefully there's some practical guidance in here, and the next time we'll be moving on something a bit more technical, moving this into contractual templates.
Fabulous. Thank you, Steve. I think that's really useful. I guess a couple of comments from me on that, and maybe extra ones. I think that the partnership is absolutely key, and I'd perhaps add to that, ask to meet somebody from the delivery team, somebody from the customer relationship management team, because it might be a different team of people that are selling the software to that are implementing it and account managing you. So always good to ask to meet those guys. I think that can be really useful. Your point on the press release, there are some levers that we have as buyers that we can use as enablers to move things on, and that's absolutely one of them. Offering to be a reference or do a video, that can grease the wheels. Knowing when your favoured vendors' quarter end, year end is, because they will want to get a signature on a piece of paper ahead of a certain date. So I would look to find out when that is, because that can be really useful as well. And then finally, on the ambiguity point, this stuff that you're agreeing is key, but it's only worth something if it's referenceable. If you agree this stuff on the phone and it's not written down anywhere, frankly, it's not worth a whole lot. So get stuff in emails. I was talking to Steve before, trying to persuade him to get one of his team perhaps to do us a little template document or something. So perhaps he'll look at that for us. But it doesn't have to be a highly legal commercial contract, but just make sure, check again that on these really important points that you're aligned and that you have an agreement. Because if you can hand something like that to your lawyers, it just starts everything off on the right foot and will shortcut the process, I think.
Definitely.
Good. All right. Well, I think that's it for today. If you haven't already, do look at the other videos and do check out the amazing resources that Elements Suite have created for you guys. Whether you're looking for a large system or a small system, there's definitely something in there that will help you through the process. If you want to consider Elements Suite, they're our preferred partner. They're great. They may or may not be the right system for you, but they're great guys. So please do take a look at their software as well. But even if you just want to reach out to Steve, Angela, or Lee, or one of the Elements Suite team for a bit of advice, they're always super helpful, regardless of whether their software is right for your business or not. So please do that. And that's about it for me, Steve, unless you've got anything to add.
Nothing else for me, Paul. Thanks for that. It's been a pleasure to run through. Looking forward to the next one. And we'll definitely put together, as you said, Paul, a kind of an interim sort of document framework that we can give to lawyers that maybe smooth that process. I think it's a really good idea. So thanks for suggesting that. And look forward to catching up again soon.
Perfect. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers, Steve.
Bye.